Next up is Alyssa Wu. She recently graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Honors Life Sciences and a minor in music from McMaster University. Alyssa is an article and book writer with the AIC. Her projects were funded by a Rising Youth grant from TakingITGlobal. Alyssa is also a research advisor with Lives for Literacy, a research assistant for Felicity, and an RCM-registered piano and theory teacher. Here she is discussing risk factors and therapeutic interventions for osteoporosis.
And today I'll be talking about a recent review article that I wrote called The Risk Factors and Therapeutic Interventions for Osteoporosis. So this article was completed in April and it was recently published in the Canadian Journal of Medicine in early July 2021. John is giving a brief overview to osteoporotic disease, and the following two sections will be about the risk factors and current therapeutic interventions for osteoporosis. Lastly, I'll wrap up our discussion by talking about the importance of patient care in a clinical setting. So let's start by discussing what it means when a patient is diagnosed with osteoporosis. The medical term osteoporosis means porous bone, which is derived from the Greek language. It is very common for osteoporosis to be referred to as a silent bone disease because it often goes undiagnosed for long periods of time. Therefore, osteoporosis is the degeneration of microarchitecture within the bones, leading to an increased risk of fracture because it decreases bone mass and bone mineral density, thereby weakening bones over time. The inner anatomy of the bone is filled with complex web-like structures called trabeculae. It is also referred to as spongy bone due to the nature of its structure. The outer layer of bone is known as compact bone because it is rigid and solid in structure. In patients with osteoporosis, we can see that there are more holes in the spongy bone due to a decrease in the bone microarchitecture. In the stages of osteoporosis panel on the right, we can see that as the osteoporotic condition worsens, there is an increase in the amount of empty space in the spongy bone. This is due to a loss in bone mineral density and overall bone mass. The development or pathogenesis of osteoporosis is strongly linked to the function of endocrine factors, one of the most prominent being parathyroid hormone or PTH. PTH is responsible for promoting osteoclast or bone breakdown activity, which releases more calcium into the bloodstream to be absorbed by the kidneys, bone, and intestine. Research has shown that vitamin D is an important factor which affects the rate of bone remodeling by increasing the amount of intestinal calcium absorption. RUNX2, or runt-related transcription factor 2, is also an important regulatory factor in the pathogenesis of osteoporosis. It is responsible for maintaining the overall health of bones, cartilage, and teeth. This transcription factor binds to specific gene segments within the DNA and facilitates the activity of coding certain genes responsible for the bone turnover cycle, also known as the process of building and decaying bone. Imbalances in estrogen levels in women who have gone through pregnancy or menopause also affect bone remodeling. When estrogen is low, this increases the bone breakdown cycle, which accelerates bone loss, but slows down the rate of bone formation. This imbalance leads to developing osteoporotic disease. So the question becomes, what is life like for patients with osteoporosis? Overall, these patients will experience a decrease in quality of life, primarily due to their loss of mobility and overall autonomy. Due to their limited mobile functioning, they often have difficulties with general activities of daily living, which include personal hygiene, getting dressed, cleaning, and cooking. In addition, these patients often report feeling socially isolated. Research has shown that males with hip fractures have a higher mortality rate than women. Consequently, those suffering from hip and spine fractures spend long periods of time being hospitalized while they undergo treatment. Next, let's discuss some of the potential risk factors in the diagnosis of patients with osteoporosis. Genetics is a common risk factor because patients with a familial history of bone fractures are more likely to develop the condition themselves. Different types of research studies, including twin studies and meta-analyses, have been used to determine the genetic markers and polymorphisms that could help clinicians diagnose the onset of osteoporotic disease. Age is also a common risk factor that doctors look at during the diagnosis of osteoporosis. As humans age, the bone turnover balance is tipped towards having more bone breakdown and less bone formation. At 30 years of age, the peak bone density is reached, and afterwards, the bone mass starts to decline slowly. BMI, or body mass index, is also used as a marker for diagnosing osteoporosis. In patient trials, it has been observed that previous fragility fractures can lead to having more compression fractures in the future. Doctors typically use this benchmark of less than 28, which indicates that this patient has a low BMI and makes them more susceptible to osteoporotic fractures. There are many different risk factors associated with the onset of osteoporosis. Lifestyle factors such as smoking, over-consuming alcohol, and physical inactivity are contributing factors. As with other health conditions, certain patient groups will be at a higher risk for developing a disease. For osteoporosis, studies have shown that patients with previous fragility fractures and postmenopausal women are more susceptible to developing osteoporosis during their lifetime. Next, let's talk about some therapeutic interventions that are currently being used to help treat osteoporosis. Exercise is considered a strong protective factor for reducing the risk of developing osteoporosis. This is because as we exercise, we are building muscle mass, which supports bone formation. As we become physically active, such as doing heavy lifting using weights, our bones endure tiny microfractures, which stimulates the osteoblasts, or bone-building cells, to fill in the gaps and produce more bone. For similar reasons, studies have also shown that aerobic dance therapy can help decrease the risk of bone fracture as well. Vitamin D is a natural bone supplement that is also known as calciferol. Data obtained from Statistics Canada revealed that only 68% of Canadians have sufficient vitamin D intake. This means that everyone should be conscious of making sure that they have adequate vitamin D intake, as it helps with the reabsorption of calcium into the systemic circulation, promoting strong bone health. The amount of vitamin D being absorbed into the body will depend on a few factors. This includes temperature, your skin pigmentation, the amount of sunscreen being used, the clothing worn, and the amount of exposed skin. To increase your intake of vitamin D, try consuming foods that are high. This includes fatty fish, liver oil, egg yolks, and fortified dairy products, including milk, cheese, and yogurt. As a conclusion, I'm going to tie in some of the main takeaways from this discussion to understanding the importance of patient care. Osteoporosis is a common bone degenerative disease that affects millions of people worldwide. Many of the risk factors associated with osteoporotic disease affect the quality for patients with osteoporosis. However, protective factors can be implemented into a patient's lifestyle as a preventative action to avoid the risk of future fractures. The importance of improving education surrounding the protective factors of osteoporosis can be implemented in everyone's daily life, as prevention and early diagnosis for all patients is key. Thank you all for listening.
Hey, thank you very much, Alyssa. That was really good.